Welcome, everyone, to the 2022 NIC Spring Conference. I'm Brian Juretka, President and CEO of NIC, and thank you so much for making the time to join us here in Dallas. I should probably get off the stage now, then. So in all seriousness, it's been a one-year hiatus. The last time we got together at the Spring Conference was in 2020. And it's been a tough 2 years. Unfortunately, it's in a year that, or last 2 years, that have had a lot of tragedy. For many of us, it's been personal, but it's also been a time when there's been resilience, there's been innovation, there's been agility, and of course, there's been heroism on the part of the frontline workers that protect the residents of seniors housing and care, some that are amongst the most frail among us. And so one of the things that we're really excited about has been kind of the innovation that has occurred over the course of the last 2 years. The innovation that's occurred across the world, innovation that's occurred in the country, and innovation that's occurred in our sector, all in the idea of learning about how to deal with the pandemic, and then really going to a world now where we're starting to live with the pandemic. And so one of the things that we've certainly seen is what metrics are available to understand that we're moving to this world where we're learning to live with COVID. One piece that Nick has very recent data on is quite frankly attendance at this conference. I get the question all the time, how many people are here, how does that compare? So let's share the data, if you will. So in 2020, which was our largest spring conference ever, we had about 1,900 or so attendees. And so here today we have about 1,700 or so attendees. So very happy about that, and that's some indication at least as to where we are from a reopening standpoint. And we are very thankful for each and every attendee. We're thankful to our board, to our sponsors, to our corporate partners that allow us to do what it is that Nick does. And by having your attendance here, you're helping us deliver on the mission by sharing ideas, by getting together and really getting to know others to hopefully get transactions done and ultimately enable access and choice for older Americans. And so, while it is, probably too early to say the pandemic is behind us, I certainly do think that as we learn to live with the pandemic, we're entering into what is the conference theme, a new day. And so as we think about this conference theme and the new day, I certainly want to thank our Spring Conference Planning Committee, who's put in a lot of time, energy, and effort to identify and curate those topics that are most important for your business right here and right now. Specifically want to call out our co-chairs of the Spring Conference, so Colleen Blumenthal of HealthTrus and Joel Mendez of JLL. So thank you very much. So you're here today in the educational session room. All educational sessions will be in this room. And this particular session right here is going to have this format of two very distinct phases. The first format is going to be about 45, 50 minutes or so discussion from our expert panel, and I apologize having my back to you. And then after that, we're going to break into these groups to talk about essentially building back occupancy. And so everyone's here because you're interested in the topic. You can learn from one another. And so the idea over here is you can learn from one another as well as meet others as you get together and talk about the topic. And so our subject matter experts here will come down and help facilitate some of those discussions. You'll see questions on the screen here as well. For those of you that are in the live streaming lounge out in the pre-function area, please join us after the discussion to be part of the small group breakouts, if you will. I also want to encourage folks, if you have any questions, go into the app, click on this title in the app, and then you'll see something that says Q&A. And you can put your questions in there, and that'll be the opportunity to ask those questions, almost live Q&A here as well. Also want to ask you from an administrative standpoint, please silence your devices. We are recording this, and so we actually have a camera up there, and anytime it hears something ring, we're going to just zoom in on you and put your face up here on the screen. So please silence your devices. So with that said, I know you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to the panel. So I'd like to turn it over to Colleen for Roadmap for Building Back Occupancy. Colleen Blumenthal, please.
Thank you, Brian. And I know I speak for the entire panel. We're so excited to be here, so excited to see you all, and thank you for coming. But first, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Derek, let's start with you.
My name is Derek Dunham. I'm with Varsity. We are a marketing communications and consulting firm based in Pennsylvania, but we work with senior living communities all across the country. We've been holding weekly roundtables for the last, tomorrow's our 100th, so every week since March of 2020 for the pandemic, or through the pandemic, and it's sales and marketing professionals, our clients, and others. So if any of you would like to have your sales and marketing teams join, they're more than welcome to.
Thank you. Courtney?
Good afternoon, I'm Courtney Siegel. I'm the president and CEO of Oakmont Management Group. We are based out of Irvine, California, and today as it sits, Oakmont Management Group manages 51 assisted living and memory care communities, predominantly in California and Nevada. 7 of those 51 communities also sit in our Ivy Living portfolio, which is a brand Oakmont launched to be complementary to the product last year.
And Joe.
Hi, my name is Joe Kiernan. I am the Chief Strategy Officer and Senior Vice President for Ocean Healthcare. We're a regional mid-size healthcare, seniors housing, and post-acute healthcare provider. I've been in healthcare. It's been a pleasure to be in healthcare for my entire life. We are centrally located in New Jersey, primarily with our post-acute and senior housing. We'll also have an array of other service lines throughout 4 other states, primarily hospice, behavioral health, and home health.
Thanks. And I'm Colleen Blumenthal, COO of HealthTrus. I'm a lowly appraiser by day. We appraise hundreds of communities, several hundreds of communities, and see many markets and properties and how they perform in those markets. And by night and on weekends, I'm task force lead for State of Seniors Housing. So I sit on a lot of data and I have a lot of interesting perspectives that I'd like to kind of share with the group here. So we all know this story, but what I want to draw your attention to is that am I doing it here? No, I'm doing it there. There we go. The drop started back in 2015. So the pandemic was problematic, clearly. Couldn't have happened at a worse time. But the occupancy decline in seniors housing happened before the pandemic hit due to a lot of new supply entering the markets. And for skilled nursing, honestly, it's been in decline since 2009. So despite millions of baby boomers getting their Medicare benefits, they weren't necessarily going to post-acute. But not all our properties are the same, and not all properties have the same story. Very interestingly, a lot of properties never saw occupancy decline below 95%. I've seen markets where things just kept hummingly along. I think the good news here is that really it's a minority that saw their occupancy drop below 80%. When we were asked to kind of size up the economic impact for Asha and Argentum on COVID, on the industry, just looking at State of Seniors Housing data, median turnover for assisted living memory care is over 50%. We were concerned that it was going to drop much, much lower than 70% in a matter of 6 months. And I think that's a tribute to all of the operators. Last year's State of Seniors Housing data, 2020, demonstrated that turnovers were at historic lows, lower than I've ever seen in the almost 20 years I've been doing it, for every single property type with the exception of assisted living, freestanding, and don't ask me, I don't know. But as vaccines became available, as visitation started to become more normal, we saw a bounce back much, much stronger for assisted living than for independent living. And I think clearly there's a lot of families that realized how much work this is and how difficult it is. But I also know in a lot of the markets that we're working in, people are coming in having waited a year, so they're frailer, and I think there might be some ongoing friction because their length of stay is not going to be quite as long as previous generations. We're now collecting the 2021 data for State of Seniors Housing. I don't know how that's going to shake out, but my guess is it'll probably be much higher turnover rates for the year 2021 than we saw in 2020 and perhaps even prior years. Assisted living, here's basically the same slide, just a different graphic. But this reminds me of the Great Recession in 2009, where suddenly a lot of folks started rethinking independent living. And we're seeing the same phenomenon now, where independent living residents are holding on, independent living communities are holding on to their residents longer than they once did. And I've heard many executive director lament, that typical assisted living resident, that she's not there anymore. So that becomes a challenge. And some of the higher acuity residents that they used to serve, they're having a hard time staffed due to nursing shortages. This should come as no surprise. The coastal communities with less land available for development are doing much better than those where land is relatively plentiful. But I do want to point out that, the really dark green circles, that's only 86% occupancy. And pre-pandemic, occupancy median for the area for the country was much higher than that, about 200 basis points. And the other thing that's fascinating to me is how each market is reacting differently. So Atlanta, some submarkets in Dallas that saw a lot of new supply, they're filling up very, very quickly. But then markets like a suburb outside of Boston that didn't have a lot of new supply come in, they're still down 1,000 basis points from where they were pre-pandemic. And so, Derek, my question to you is, has something fundamentally changed with who's coming into seniors housing right now? And if so, how are you helping clients manage that?
I don't think there's really anything that has fundamentally changed. People are still looking for the same sorts of things as they're coming into the marketplace. They're looking for lifestyle, they're looking for access to the continuum, the amenities, and those sorts of things. But we are hearing also that prospects are wanting to put the pandemic behind them. They don't necessarily want to continue to be focused on that and thinking about the pandemic, although they do want to know how did the communities respond and deal with it, so that if there's another variant and such, what will life be like? What could life be like? Now, in the pandemic, we've been asking, on the roundtables, we've been asking folks what has changed, how has it been different? And one thing that we're hearing consistently is consumers are more prospects, and they're adult child influencers, depending upon the age and the level of living. They're more informed than ever before. They have done their research. They know what they're looking for. They are asking more savvy questions. They don't want to be sold to. Doesn't mean that the sales team shouldn't be using all of those relationship sorts of tactics, if you will, but they really know what they want, and they're coming in much more informed on the marketplace. We're still hearing, I'm not ready yet, but they want that access to the continuum.
And Courtney, you've opened a lot of buildings during the pandemic. Are you finding that the people who moved in are different than what you thought you were going to attract?
Yeah, so since the beginning of 2020, we opened 12 new communities. Most of those were over 6 months ago, and they're all over 90% occupied. I think when I look at the pre-pandemic consumer to what we're seeing now, there really isn't much difference in terms of the data points. Our average length of stay has gone from 20 months pre-pandemic to about 19 months this past year. Acuity levels slightly higher, but nothing's notable. So I think the consumer is very much the same. What I will say I saw a change in is what it was that we needed to do to get them comfortable to be a buyer, to be someone to actually move into the community. Gone were the days of highly amenitized buildings, social and culinary programs that made the adult children proud to have mom in assisted living or memory care. It was really about safety and security. What is it that Oakmont is going to do to keep mom safe and secure? How can he or she have access to resources, access to health care? So it caused us to make a more robust toolkit on a marketing front to speak to them, but then on an operations front as well. And so today, the pulse that we have from our communities, and we still have a number of communities in lease up, is it just depends upon what's important to the consumer. And now our teams, to Derek's point, have so much more robust access to providing solutions to what it is the consumer is looking for to get them comfortable to move into the building.
Wow. Very impressive. Joe, I mean, you're located in the Northeast, which got hit heavy and hard very early on. Focusing more on the post-acute side, have you seen changes in who's coming and how much has home health and other changes in consumer behavior impacted you?
So as you said, we were hit, especially in the Northeast, from COVID. So occupancy levels dropped significantly. The skilled nursing industry took a real hit with the pandemic. What we've seen is a real turn back to almost pre-pandemic referral behavior from our acute care partners. So there was a significant demand for beds prior. I think everybody was sort of in a holding position during the pandemic, and where we've seen our occupancy go from a low that was just unheard of before, we're almost getting back to probably 5 to 7 percentage points away from where we were prior to the pandemic. So we really started to see, after this past 2 years, our acute care partners really coming back and saying, okay, we're going to start talking about the things we were talking about 2 years ago. So now we want to start to focus on our ACOs. We want to start to focus on the BPCI programming. We need you to take higher acuity patients. We've got to get these patients out of the hospitals faster. So I feel that on the post-acute side, there's a real robust opportunity to have those occupancies grow back. With regard to home health, we also have a skilled home health company, and the demand there has been just as strong as it was during the pandemic, when people did not want to go into skilled nursing or to a post-acute setting. They wanted to go home, but they were even reluctant to allow someone into their home. So that part of it we were somewhat confused because we really saw the demand on our skilled nursing buildings rising, but I have more home health business than I know what to do with, and some of that is for other reasons, which I know you're going to get into later on. But the demand for that has still been there, but I did see a shift going back to pre-pandemic behavior versus strategy with regard to referrals going into post-acute that were going to home health during the pandemic.
And that's been just in the last few months?
With regard to?
The referral patterns changing.
It really has. I would say as we really kind of came out of Delta and with Omicron not being as significant and really kind of spiking in a 2 to 3 week window and then dropping back down, I think the acute care health systems were like, okay, are we in for this again? Then everybody calmed down, and people, I think consumers and patients felt more comfortable going for procedures, going back into the hospital. So the pipeline of business coming into the post-acute side, as well as the home care side, stayed more full than it did during some of the previous variants.
So you threw a lot of acronyms at us, and I know we live in an age of data. My phone tells me how well I slept. My watch tells me how well I slept. They don't always agree, and they've got different metrics they use. And so, Courtney, I'm wondering, when you're making your value proposition to prospective residents and their families, what kind of metrics are you giving them, or how are you harnessing data to prove that you do provide the care?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm going to kind of separate it into two parts there, Colleen. You know, internally, we're consumers of data. We're constantly looking at data points. Everything from, the fall risk program we have in our community, use of psychotropics, we're measuring outcomes, and we're doing those things on a daily basis with our clinical teams. What we're utilizing that for is to continue to come up with a strategy that allows us to be the leader of excellence, the leader in providing excellent care, kind of prioritizing what we need to do next to be better. It could be an integration of tech, it could be streamlining a process, a new partner with a healthcare system or healthcare provider. But when I think about occupancy, those aren't data points we're sharing with our consumer at this time. When I think about the consumer of assisted living and memory care, which is what we do, they don't come in and get comfortable with what you're going to do for them either today or if and when they need it by looking at data points and a bunch of strangers' history of falls or outcomes. What they're looking for is trust, and the only way that comes about is through the relationship that they're developing with the on-site team. How do they feel when they're interacting with the marketing director or the nurse? Did they meet the executive director? Meeting those people and developing the trust gives them the confidence that we have the systems, the training, and the programs. So I think when Oakmont looks at data, we use it more internally to be the best we can be, and to challenge ourselves on what's next for us. How can we better integrate healthcare into our residential setting? But when I think about building occupancy and using and sharing that, it's not a tool that we're really using or marketing at this time.
That's interesting. So Joe, I know you've been on the forefront of really capturing data in order to work with ACOs, work with some of your acute care partners, and that's obviously worked for you. It's helped, improved your occupancy and your mix. Can you share more of that with us?
Absolutely. So and I really think it goes back to what Courtney was saying about relationships. So not only do you have to have, you need to be able to get to the table, and we've talked about that years ago, about how do you position yourself to be in the room and at the table. We have to assume everybody's already been there and done that. So what are you going to the table with? And how engaged of a partner are you? So understanding what your referral source or your health system is looking for, what their goals and objectives are. What are their strategic goals for the year? What are the numbers they're looking for relative to the shared savings environment that they're in, whether that be singularly just an ACO mixed in with a bundled program, which is now mandatory. So we're seeing, and then how many of those bundles have they selected? And where are those pain points? Is it, so everything is really clinically driven. So in order for us, and the success that we've had, where historically pre-pandemic, we always ran somewhere around 10 to 12% above industry-wide occupancy. So whether it be national and probably about 10% above state, and that was because of those relationships and our ability to meet the needs. Those needs changed and evolved over years, and nobody talked about any of this anymore. Of course, length of stay went up, readmissions went up, all of the numbers and the data looked horrible. So now they're coming back and saying, okay, it's time that we start talking about this again. So really focusing in on what a realistic length of stay is. Those are some, and this is not, rocket science, but it's looking at what where do we need to fall with certain clinical groups, clinical diagnostic groups, with regard to length of stay to maximize their outcome while minimizing the risk of readmission once they return home into the community. The big factor is really the readmissions. And lowering that readmission rate. Okay. So as a post-acute provider, what we've done in order to, so where the national occupancy is sitting right now, I think according to NIC data is between 72, 73%. New Jersey is right there at the same point, which has typically always been higher than national because, as you pointed out on the slide, East Coast, West Coast. So we're sitting right now, and the biggest driver was our ability to stay engaged at about 84 to 85% occupancy. Nice. So I attribute that success to the strength of those partnerships, but also the strength of the services that we decided to go and focus on. And essentially it's follow the bundle, follow the shared savings program, focus in on that, and that's what we've done, and be able to then walk in and not talk about how great your CHF program is, or your respiratory program, or your stroke program, but show them the readmission numbers based on those programs. Sure. And how it ties back to their financial outcome. And that's where we keep getting invited, and where they're focused in these population health departments, much more so than social work and case management, are now the driving factors of where patients are going to go for care.
Fascinating. Thank you. Derek, my sense is a lot of independent living communities or life plan communities that have a strong independent living focus thought that they were more of a hospitality model, and maybe the pandemic made everyone realize, no, they provide health care as well. Are you seeing any change there with particularly those at the lower end of the acuity scale as far as how they're accommodating aging in place? Are they starting to collect data to share with potential partners, or what are you seeing?
Certainly. Aging in place is something that has been part of the conversation for a few years now. And I know communities struggle with that because the folks coming in want to be able to age in place. They want to be able to stay in their apartments or whatever level of living they're in and not have to move. Whereas when they're coming in themselves, they don't want to, we hear it all the time, they don't want to live around all those old people, even though they themselves are of a certain age. So they are certainly trying to accommodate and bringing in home health, or a lot of our clients are even starting their own home health agencies if they haven't already had them. But challenge there certainly is staffing and workforce development, which is of course I know there are other sessions throughout the conference here that's something that's plaguing the entire world right now. But so it's a matter of trying to staff it. But in terms of collecting data, I think it is important to understand how people are being able to stay safe in their own homes and be able to live the lifestyle that they want and getting all of those needs met. And we were at a fairly new client about 6-8 months ago, and we were touring there, and this is the first time that this happened quite this bluntly, but a woman came out from her residence and asked who we were, and we explained that we were the marketing firm, and she instructed me not to bring in people with walkers and wheelchairs and try to bring in people that were much more vibrant, and that was what that's who she wanted to live with, even though she herself used a mobility device. But that's the way it goes.
It's always a challenge. So you touched upon labor. Joe, where you are, how much is labor really kind of constraining how you can refill your buildings?
So I would say over the past 4 to 6 weeks, I've really seen the stress of it ease up a little bit. But we were at the point where, as I think a lot of post-acute providers, and even on the seniors housing side, really were struggling with the ability to have a staffing pattern that was going to be safe in order to continue to bring in admissions. So you really either, buildings that would be able to do, say, 6 admissions on a post-acute building, 6, 7, 8 admissions in a day, where, the DON is coming in and saying, okay, we can only handle 2. Or I have enough staff to take care of people, but I don't have enough staff to actually do the admission when 5 people roll in the door. So there was a lot of different factors. What helped us survive through the pandemic is the fact that when we started to see all of this, I remembered in our private duty home health company that we had a staffing license. And so it was sitting in a drawer, and I said, okay, well, we're gonna pull that thing out, and I had about 2 days to learn how to run a staffing agency. So we were able to staff our own buildings, which was great because that expense was gonna be spent regardless. Even though it moved from one pocket to another pocket in the same pair of pants, that would have been expense that went out the door. So it supported our centers and our communities, but recently what it has been enabled us to stabilize where our staffing is so that we can continue to grow our occupancy. We were holding kind of in a holding pattern when the real staffing shortage hit right after Delta, when everybody kind of made some decisions that they want to either exit the space or this is not the kind of work they want to do any longer. And then of course, you could do a whole session on recruitment and retention, and I think that we're actually having a session on that. So a little plug for that later, so I'm not going to get into that component of it, but those are things that need to be looked at. But really, how do we attract people, and then how are we utilizing our own resources in order to stabilize our staff?
It definitely helps keep your buildings at an above average occupancy.
Yes, it certainly did. Yep.
So Derek, I know, and I always pick on my poor in-laws, but they're in an independent living community, And dining service is now dependent on whether they have enough staff that show up, because you can just as easily, work, I don't know, at Target and make more. What are you seeing some of your clients on the lower acuity do when you've got Amazon, Target, Walmart, even in really obscure areas, now paying $5, $6, $7, $8 above minimum wage?
Mm-hmm. We're seeing, clients as well as others that we've been connecting with, through the roundtable, as I mentioned, doing everything from flexible scheduling to, the bonuses and adjusting, the pay structure. We have clients who are, as they're expanding, they're adding workforce housing in on the community. So as a way to actually provide that, because we have some communities are fairly in high income areas or just aren't able to, not on a bus line or something. So it's difficult for people to access it. So there are some of those ways that it's really they're finding some unique ways to get around it. And one thing that I think is important too is when communities are building their brand. The brand needs to attract prospective residents, and it needs to speak to, the adult children and such, but it also needs to speak to the potential team members. It needs to connect with them on an emotional level and really let them know what the community, has to offer. So and that's certainly, important. And then, also, something else that's critical is making sure that you're managing your Indeed reviews, your Glassdoor reviews, all of those kinds of things, and making sure that if you have happy, and I'm sure you have a lot of happy team members, making sure that they're posting reviews as well, not just the handful of people who may be disgruntled, which we all know that every organization has those. So making sure that you're actually managing toward that so that people can see all of the positive things that you're doing.
That's excellent. So Courtney, I don't know what's more impressive actually, that you opened so many buildings and leased them up during a pandemic, or that you found the staff to take care of them. So please share your secret sauce.
I'm trying to figure out the secret sauce every day. I think for us at Oakmont and Ivy, it really came down to two things to lease up these communities and keep the stabilized communities fully staffed, and it was prioritization and investment. And when you think about what the on-site team is tasked to do every single day with their roles and responsibilities, on top of that, most of them probably don't even get to their desk before they're interrupted by team members, by families, by residents who need immediate attention and their time. Recruitment falls to the bottom of their priority list. It just naturally happens over the evolution of the day. And so how can we at a home office or a support level reprioritize what's important to the organization? Yes, we want performance and occupancy, but we're very much now in the recruiting business as well. So how do we do things to support you and then have accountability in and around recruitment efforts at the community level? I think on the investment front, when you look at the operators in the space, for all intents and purposes, we all do a really good job building out robust marketing teams. We've got the players who handle online, we've got our reputation management, we've got a digital campaign, sometimes a print campaign. We're making the investment to have robust marketing efforts to drive traffic to our communities. We need to now do the same thing, if we haven't already, or if you haven't already, with your recruiting department. And thinking about recruiting differently than picking up the phone or going on LinkedIn and trying to find someone who has a lot of experience that matches what we're recruiting for. We brought in addition to our existing recruitment department, 2 really diverse skill sets in 2 individuals, and their job is to really do grassroots recruiting. So we have one doing job fairs full-time. All she does is set up job fairs for the individual communities and drive applicants to the buildings. We have been tremendously successful. We've had that position full-time for a year now, and we're getting anywhere from 25 to sometimes 70 applicants in difficult California markets to come to our job fairs. And so that has been something that's worked wonders for us. Our partnerships with universities and with some of the trade schools has also proven to be successful. But we as an industry are full-time recruiters now, and we have to start thinking strategically. We need social media campaigns. We need to mirror our recruiting departments and recruiting efforts to match those of our marketing. And I think that's been something that hasn't helped us make the secret sauce, but it's helped us kind of avoid what we hear is going on with some of the other operators in the space.
That's great.
Well, thank you for sharing with the entire group. I appreciate that. So last year, most of what we saw on the appraisal side were the newer, sexy, failed to thrive before the pandemic buildings, which everyone wants because they're new, they're sexy, and eventually the baby boomers will show up. And then there were a lot of 20-year-old buildings with too many studios or just small unit sizes. And Derek, do you have clients that have portfolios of those type of buildings, and how do you help them manage?
Sure, and I think the obvious thing that everybody goes to is combining. When you can combine 2 studios or 2 one-bedrooms into a larger space, that helps that. That's not often something that you can do because they're in different parts of the building or what have you. Plus, it also reduces the income that you can get from having fewer residences. So some of the things that we've seen really work is making sure that those smaller spaces are professionally staged. Bringing people in to who can really work with the space and let people dream, see what it can be. We've had success by featuring some of those spaces, floor plans, folks who live in those smaller spaces, in monthly emails to really say here is a particular apartment that's available right now, and featuring that. So I think that's been really quite successful, and then also through targeting particular groups, people who might be perhaps on the lower end of the income scale that can access the community, who might not even think that they would have an opportunity to live there in the community. That's a great way to do it. Or single. I know often single men tend to be I don't want to say content, but are happier with a smaller space such as that. So really trying to be strategic about who you're talking to, how you're targeting them, and then I know this isn't a solution for income necessarily, but we have had some clients using those for again for workforce housing, as well as turning them into guest suites so that people can come in, or even a place where if somebody wants that corner 2-bedroom apartment, but they want to be priority, they can come in through that smaller space and then work up to that.
Workforce housing, yes, I can see that working in some buildings. Courtney, with the high barrier markets that you're in, does that necessarily mean that regardless of vintage, everyone's full? Or how are you seeing the older communities in your markets adapt?
Yes, certainly a high barrier to entry market is nice, but success can't hinge on a market having high barriers to enter it. In our portfolio, we have communities that opened 90 days ago, and I have communities that are 25 plus years old. And when I think about it, regardless of the age of the asset or the market it's in, each community needs its own ever-evolving strategy that's particular to that asset. When I see operators and companies do a streamlined marketing or operations process, they tend to not have as much success. And I'll use Oakmont and Ivy Living as an example. When I go into a community that's not performing the way I'd like to see it perform, the most basic thing I do is look at the inventory, right? What's available, what's on the market in comparison to what the competitors have on the market? And what's our value proposition in our campaign to fill these units? If I have a bunch of studios or memory care units on the market, and I look at our ad campaigns and we've got a 50-year-old senior running in a field or rowing a boat, that's not going to attract what vacancy we have in the community. And when I look at search engine optimization words, or my marketing team does, and it's all about acuity and care, yet we've got large floor plans on the market, it's mismatched, and you're never going to be successful. So my advice, to answer your question, Colleen, is to always be high touch. Have your teams high touch and know that your marketing plan is going to evolve every day based upon your vacancy, and your strategy to fill them is going to evolve as new players come to the market. And don't be everything to everyone. Figure out what your niche is in the market. Teach and train and live by your value proposition, and regardless of the age of the asset or new supply in the market, you're going to have a competitive edge over the other players in the space any day of the week.
Thank you. Okay, Joe, so keeping it on post-acute maybe, there's a lot of buildings out there that are far older than 20 years, and I won't even get into California, but have 3 and 4 bed wards that I know Massachusetts, for example, is trying to eliminate 3 bed wards, and many states are trying to do the same. How do those buildings adapt, and what do you recommend for some of those maybe functionally obsolete plants?
So our organization has grown primarily through acquisition, and we have acquired a number of county-owned facilities. And so when the county built something, we encountered that a lot, knowing, and this was years ago. So when you maybe could get away with it, but when you're acquiring a property that was that old, you go into that knowing you've got to make those changes. So we eliminated those. I think that in order to stay competitive, there's been a big push and a move for single occupancy, private rooms. Health systems are building all private room hospitals that look like massive hotels. I mean, the amount of amenities that are available from that privacy perspective is amazing. And so there's been a lot of development on the post-acute end where operators are building and running these private single room centers. I would have to look at a warn, like what's the number of beds that you can actually sustain based off of the cost of building a facility like that, with a potentially shrinking market or the need to be able to capture additional market share. You've got healthcare systems who are trying to not refer to you because they don't want patients going into an expensive setting. They want these patients to go home. So the ACO, patients going that are ACO patients or your bundled patients going into a post-acute, it's counterintuitive to what their goal is, which is to actually have shared savings. So we sit down in these post-acute provider meetings and they're saying, so we're concerned because our utilization of post-acute services hasn't gone down enough. And here we are, a room full of post-acute providers. You need to be able to attract people. So I would say that the having 3 and 4 bedrooms is definitely obsolete. I think that you need to look at how can you maximize those into either semi-privates or even having a separate section of your property that is designed for a clinical program, that you can create some of those larger spaces and turn them into clinical suites, and then utilize that to promote that with your health system.
I know a lot of communities did that during COVID and kind of created an in-house an in-house ICU, if you will. Almost.
Absolutely. And I think staying on top of your CapEx and looking at what you need to do to stay on top of your buildings before you become physically obsolete, and so that you're not just, you're staying ahead of the curve.
Right. Courtney, we had a question come in. What do you attribute your pre-opening success to?
What do I do to create pre-opening success?
Oh, what do you attribute your success to pre-opening? What do you do to kind of...
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, and I think it's 2 simple answers. The first thing we do is we go in and we cast a really wide net on the market. We're not there if we didn't already shop it and feel like there's a spot for our product. So we know on demo sets, just like everyone else, we know on the comp shop it's gonna work. So we go in and cast a really wide net, and we track every single phone call, deposit, what zip code they're coming from, how they heard us, so that we can hone in on a really tight strategy. We do it from a cost standpoint, but we also do it because once you find your market, you know exactly which barrel to go to fish in. I think the other piece is accountability. Our industry at large can be very complacent as operators, certainly coming out of COVID, where we needed to be supportive and empathetic in ways we've never been to the heroes working on the front lines. It's hard to then, where do we weave performance in? And I think at its basic, there's a minimum standard we expect in terms of outreach, phone calls, and deposits that should be collected on a weekly basis. And so I think it's a 2-part. It's us at the home office doing our part to give them every dollar and resource to be successful. And then on their side, them holding up the deal, delivering the results. Where we have struggled in pre-lease up, it has predominantly been a people issue. or a lack of sales activity. So I think there's a lot of pieces that go into a lease up. Those I think are the two big ones and sometimes differentiators I see.
Thank you. One other question from our audience, and I'll direct this to the entire panel. Do you have any examples of new technologies and or apps that are attractive to both residents and families, and are they impacting, can they be used to improve occupancy?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at that. Derek, you want to?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's so much tech out there. You have to be careful about what you're spending your time looking at. I think the concept of choice feels really good to our residents, but even more to their family. Whether or not it's being used right now, I think is a question. We build in a lot of tech platforms where you can have additional housekeeping or you can order your to-go meal. It doesn't get utilized a lot from a practical standpoint, at least at my communities. Assisted living and memory care. But on the onset, on the experience, on the initial wow factor of Oakmont and Ivy, we certainly see a high level of interest. I think as our consumer continues over the next 5 years to move in, I think a lot of those things that involve choice within the community, optionality, are going to be utilized a lot more than we see it utilized. But certainly from a sales and marketing standpoint, it's highly sought after and desirable on the front end.
I would have to say also, I think the jumping off of, our utilization of virtual meetings. So we've all been on Zoom or Teams or whatever the platform is. It's become so normal and commonplace where we can have, multiple meetings in a day where, instead of all of the travel. We've really maximized the utilization of that, or expanded the utilization outside of our offices and put it out into our assisted living communities, our skilled nursing properties, so that patients and families and residents can reach each other so much more frequently and easier. We utilized it in our hospice as part of a virtual visit. If you have a loved one that lives across the country and cannot come visit you, and you want to have that interaction, you always could. That we did it there, but we never really thought about doing it in either our assisted living or our skilled nursing properties until we were using it. And now there's Zoom stations and Zoom, setups where everybody can go and say, I want to visit my sister who lives in California.
That's great. So maybe the one question that everyone in the room wants to have answered, and I'll be honest, we don't pretend to know. Maybe collectively we can figure that out. But the question is, and I'll start with you, Joe, when do we get back to normal in terms of occupancy?
This was the question I didn't want to have to answer. So I think that, where we're seeing, I think on the post-acute, the skilled nursing environment, depending on the region that you're in and what we're experiencing, is that we're starting to already experience some of that normalization where we're seeing the higher occupancy numbers. Our quality mix and case mix is increasing. So I'm going to put it out there overall, globally, looking at the entire post-acute market. I think we're probably, a good year and a half to 2 years where we'll see, and it'll feel much like it did before. I think some operators and some regions will get there a lot sooner, and then it's going to take others a little bit longer. I actually think you should.
Courtney, you're already
senior
there,
housing
right?
side.
Well, I'm a little more bullish than Joe, so I think we're recovering a lot sooner than that. We've pretty much recovered to pre-pandemic levels at this point. We're really knocking on the door. Our stabilized portfolio, same store, pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, is just about at 95%. Our lease-up portfolio, which really consists of our new development that's opened in the last year, or communities we've transitioned into our company, they're in the low to mid 80s at this point. And so we feel really confident about the traffic we're seeing, about the conversion ratios, about the clientele and consumer interest in senior living. I've got a lot of friends in the space as well, and I know they're too seeing a lot of inquiry increase traffic in numbers that they hadn't seen in a long time. And so I think we're right there. I think we're knocking on the door. I think it's all about how we execute at the property level and the expectations and standards we as an industry hold. I think if we can get rid of some of the complacency and get back to what made us really good in the beginning, I think we'll get there even faster.
And I would agree. We're seeing, with a lot of folks, a lot of communities that they're having record years. They haven't had occupancy this high in 10, 12 years. So, I think people are also, because they're better informed, they're making decisions more quickly in some instances. They're able to, we've had folks who are actually making decisions within days and weeks of coming to their first event. So, because they have done that pre-work and know what they're looking for. So, I would agree. I think we're, in many instances, I think we've recovered.
And being the appraiser, of course, I'll say it depends. I agree with Courtney. Some markets are probably already there. We really look at not even just on a metro area, but a competitive market area. And there are some markets that I think it's going to be a very long time, longer than your 2 to 3 years. I think in the short run, I am concerned, not so much on post-acute, which I agree with Joe, is probably going to come roaring back sooner rather than later, because there aren't enough nurses for everyone to receive home care. But when it comes to assisted living and memory care in particular, I think you're going to have a lot more friction, a lot of turnover, much higher this year, and maybe one more year is going to kind of stretch out that refill process. But hopefully we gave you enough ideas, and we'll have more that we can discuss when Brian joins us and the lights come back on.
Thank you so much for, I think, which was a fascinating discussion. We are going to have this entire panel back in about 2 years to see where the predictions end up. Certainly is market dependent, product dependent, which is a lot of what we've seen in the data as well.